Okay, good morning, everyone. Shavua Tov. We're going to do Psalm 97. I've been saying this for like a couple of months that we're going to return to the Psalms which are in Kabbalat Shabbat. And the Psalms of Kabbalat Shabbat are basically a unit, 95 to 99, those five representing the 5 days of the week, Sunday through Thursday. The sixth Psalm, which represents the entire week, is Psalm 29, and that has God's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, the name of God, 18 times, representing the Shmona Esrei prayer of weekdays. So it's like the whole shvung, the whole method of Kabbalat Shabbat is to like go through God's relationship with the universe as goes through the relation of the universe as God the creator, and then like getting ready for it to Shabbos, which is a day not of creation but of rest. And of course, you know, the culmination of I want to say Pesukei and Zimra. Now the culmination of Kabbalat Shabbat is Psalm 92, the Psalm for Shabbat, Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat. So, but we're still in the midst of this progression that we began many, many months ago, and we interrupted because of other events. But so now we're back to Psalm 97. Psalm 97. I've just been told that I am now the host. Okay, so again, we're doing Psalm 97, Tzadi Zion, and again, it's part of this series of Psalms describing the greatness of Hashem, basically through nature and creation. And so with that in mind, before we start the Psalm, I just want to read an introduction to the Psalm that's from Rabbi Weinreb. There's a very nice Koran edition in English of the Psalms, and Rabbi Weinreb took many of the Psalms, really all of them, but some it's more extensive and some it's more cryptic, but he wrote something beautiful at the beginning of Psalm 97. Again, Psalm 97 talks about Bria, creation, God as the creator of the universe, and God as behind everything that happens in the universe, and how wonderful the universe is as a result of this. And we'll see it more in detail in just a minute. But he says, he begins this psalm by saying, I need this psalm. It's like, you know, I really, in my present situation in life, I need this psalm. Why? Because he says, I am in deep and dark despair. There is tragedy in the world and great evil. Where is hope? And then he goes on to say that this psalm is a message of hope, which we're going to see this, and we're going to talk about it. But that introduction fits in very much with the way our world is right now. We do feel both the sense of tragedy and evil in the world, and of course that's because of COVID and coronavirus and all that. But we our community and the neighborhood of the OU Center is of course in mourning right now because Erev Shabbat we lost a very great man, and in a moment I'm going to quote from him in his parish on Salem. We lost Reb Steinsaltz. And I think it's worthwhile to note, you know, his passing, and I'll do my best to show him some honor by quoting from him Devat Torah in just a moment. But he was very, very special, and my few personal interactions, I mean, many interactions with him on the written page. But my few personal interactions with them were very, very special. I remember them very, very fondly. He was not a dynamic speaker. Twice I heard him give, no, three times, I heard him give public addresses, and they were fine. They were informative, and I walked away with knowledge and with inspiring material, but his presentation was not overwhelming. He was a dynamic conversationalist. When you spoke to him, either one-on-one or in a small group, one time I was at a dinner party with him, he was mesmerizing. And it's so interesting that this warmth was so palatable in the small setting, but lost sadly in a larger forum. The only other person that I really experienced that with was Aryeh Kaplan, though, Shalom. That Aryeh Kaplan also, when you talked to him in a small group or one-on-one, it was like you didn't want it to end. I mean, you lost track of time. When he spoke to a group from his podium, it's like you spent your time looking at your watch. When is this going to end? It's just fascinating. And they both had similar backgrounds in physics. So it's interesting that they seem to have had that in common. And of course, Baruch Hashem, what we have from both of them is just, whole libraries of written material. And Rav Steinsaltz was just an inspiring human being for the combination of zeal to carry projects through, whether it was his translation of Shas or Parish on so many things, or his educational endeavors. He just had this zeal while simultaneously having this tremendous warmth. And when I've been in the presence of other builders, and you got the sense of a little bit put off. You were like in awe of what they did, but a little overwhelmed by their presence. Never with Rav Steinsaltz. And when you spoke to him, you really felt like his entire focus was on you. You never felt like he was busy with something else. This is even true one time when I came into his office off Agrippas. And he was busy, immersed in something, and I came in with somebody else, and you immediately felt like he had your total attention. And it was very special. Like I said, I mamish cherish those few interactions, and they will live with me forever. And in just a moment, I'm going to say something inspired by him as well. And I use every week, and people have seen, his parish on Tehillim. I find it, succinct and to the point, but he put together a wonderful book that has beautiful artwork and other Hasidic portion on it. It's a very worthwhile sefer to have. It's beautiful as well as extremely informative. Okay, that's for me a very long introduction, but let's begin the poem, which, as Reb Weinreb says, gives us a good feeling, and we need that. We need that for so many reasons. Okay, and it begins because it's in a series of psalms, a series of poems. They begin. They don't no introduction, straight into the action. Hashem Malach, and that's a powerful beginning. Hashem reigns. Hashem rules. God is in charge. And as a result of this sense that God is in charge, Tagel Haaretz, the land, the earth, the creation, the entire cosmos is glad, is joyous. It feels good about the fact, the sense that Hashem is in charge, that the realization that a Kadosh Baruch Hu is pulling the strings. You'll understand in a minute why I use that expression. That Hashem is pulling the strings in the background, behind the pargod, behind the curtain. That gives us a sense of, wow, I can be happy. It's okay. The second clause of that sentence, at least according to the Malbim, tells us something important about the poem, that's going to go forward. Yismechu iyim rabim. There are many islands that are and have continued to be happy about this. This is not just a regular future tense. I don't remember what it's called in grammar. It's a future tense from a continuation, from now and continuing into the future. And the Malbim makes the point. What's the big deal? We just said the whole universe, all of creation, the Aretz, right? Breshit Baralam et Hashemayim bet Aretz. Aretz is everything. Why Iyim? I mean, we just said, wow, God created, rules the continents and the itty bitty islands. What's going on here? So the Malbim says that the beginning of the poem, basically the first, I think 9 verses of the poem are talking about Hashgacha Klalit, God's general supervision of the world. God's general supervision of the world is basically hidden. It's behind the scenes, which is why I said God's pulling the strings, as opposed to Hashgacha Pratit, God's specific intervention, which is more miraculous and more obvious. So what's going on by specifying the islands, according to the Malbim, is that when God is ruling in this vast panoply of actions that we call Hashgacha Klalit, general supervision of everything, no one individual, no one prat, no one little piece can feel that they are being focused on and that they might be in trouble based on their own personal actions. There's a certain sense that when you're in a crowd, it's safer than when I'm standing out all by myself. The islands represent the little pratim, the little details. So each individual within this vast whole still feels happy because they don't feel focused on. Let's say you were standing in a crowd. I don't know, maybe you were at a demonstration. I can barely remember those days when I went to demonstrations. But you feel safety in numbers. But let's say, and this happened to a friend of mine who was very close to me at a demonstration against the war in Vietnam in 1969, I'm going to say, and we were in Boston Common, and a big crowd, and it got dark, and it was night, and then the police had on their squad cars individual beams of light, and a guy sitting like 2 people next to me got shined on with the beam of light. Previously, he'd been yelling and screaming, heck no, we won't go, and whatever we were screaming, but at that moment, when the light was shined upon my friend, 2 people down from me, he stopped, and he felt afraid. Because when you're no longer in that safety of numbers. So what we're saying in this second line is the iyim, the individual within this vast scope, they're happy because they know that their specific action won't necessarily ruin it for everybody or even for themselves, because Hashem is on automatic pilot. Sun's going to rise every morning, set every afternoon. So I don't have to worry. The pratim, the little detail, the little individuals are not worried. And they're happy. And there's a certain joy in this. And this joy comes from a certain amount of anonymity. It gets scary when you feel that you're, being focused on. You're under God's microscope. Then it's scary. But right now we're saying, no, there's a joy in this. And how does Hashem enter the picture? It's fascinating. Hashem enters the picture in verse 2. Anan va'arafel svivav tzedek. So we're saying that clouds and thick darkness are surrounding him. So Anan is a cloud, Arafel is a fog. So that God is shrouded in this mist and this fog, okay? And that, what does this mean? That again, it's not hashgacha pratit. It's not the miraculous material of God's supervision, like splitting the Red Sea or at Mount Sinai. We're talking about the laws of physics, right? And in the laws of physics, we believe that God is behind, those esoteric formula, okay? But God is not front and center. God is somehow hiding behind. And tzedek u'mishpat machon kiso. But the throne of God, from where God, lahavdol, like the Wizard of Oz, behind the curtain, is pulling the strings, but the throne is based upon tzedek, righteousness, mishpat, justice, that there's a sense of ultimate right and wrong is being provided by this control, supervision by HaKadosh Baruch. Having said that, I just want to, that's the way the Malbim looks at it, a slightly different approach, and this is Rav Steinsaltz, Oliver Shalom's interpretation. And now, here in verse 2, I'm going to describe David HaMelech, the poet, David HaMelech, our singer, is going to describe the apparition of Hashem. Anan va'arafel svivav. Cloud and fog surround him. Vehem mastirim oto. They hide him. They make his entry a bit secret and mysterious. Ba'oju yoshev al kisei ram. While he is sitting upon this exalted throne, he still comes into the picture. I want to say something about that in just a second. Asher tzedek mishpat hem machon kiso. And the foundation of that throne of power is based upon tzedek u'mishpat, goodness, righteousness, truth, justice. Koloma, haken habasi shalav omed hakisei. They are the foundation that there is, and I have to believe, and this goes back to what Reb Weinreb is saying, I have to believe that ultimately there is tzedek or mishpat behind the scenes, making sure that there is a happy ending, that no matter how bad things look, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is indeed maintaining the stability of it all. There's a tremendous amount, and this is part of the point of Steinsaltz and of the Pasuk. There's a tremendous amount of security in stability. It's when things, it's when we don't know what's going on. We're in one of those time periods when, everything, we've lost shigra. We've lost the normal flow of life. And we just pray for that to return. But we're being told here that it is going to return. Yeah. It'll be a few more months or whatever it is, but it will return because hachin is the word that Steinsaltz uses. It's based on a system that is good and trustworthy and just. And that's what we have to believe. And that the basics of our reality are really there. And don't worry, we're going through a tough period. People have told me, I've never been there, but a couple of friends of mine from California have said there's nothing as scary as an earthquake. And I've been in hurricanes. I remember I was, near a tornado in Florida once, and those are very, very scary. But they said there's nothing quite so scary as an earthquake, because the earthquake takes terra firma and shakes it up. When you don't feel that the foundations are firm, That's the scariest thing. And I hope that we believe, like these psukim are saying to us, that even though we're going through, a shaky period, nevertheless, the foundations are there. It'll be okay. We're gonna get through this okay. Yeah, it's gonna take a bit, and it's and the lack of the lack of security, the lack of a visible enemy makes it tougher. It's easier to fight a human enemy that you can see rather than an invisible virus. But we're going to pull through this. That's what we're being told, and this is very important. Now, having said that, we're now going to have a few verses talking about the world at large's reaction to this reality. We're accepting this reality that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has established a fundamental, stable system. And that's wonderful. And it brings joy, and it brings satisfaction and happiness. And we feel good about that. But how do people look at it that aren't necessarily in our world? So in our point of view. So it says, Eish lefanav telech, a fire goes out before God. Utalahet saviv sarav, and it burns up, it consumes all of sarav. So there is a general joy in the situation, in the stability, in the status quo of our universe. However, we're being told in no uncertain terms that if you try to undo the system, if you by your nature are an enemy of God, and we'll see specifically who these enemies are, what the definition of the enemies are, you're in trouble. Because you're not going to survive this. Now, we don't know what survive means. Doesn't mean this world, doesn't mean the world to come. I mean, you can take your pick. I don't know. But the good positions are ultimately going to thrive, ultimately. Because a fire will come out from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and consume those who are against Hashem. And now, I don't know how far we're going to get in the poem. I doubt we're going to finish it. So something bad is going to happen because if you don't do it in one go, you lose some of the connections. In this line 4, in verse 4, we're going to talk about lightning. I hope I remember, because we're probably not going to get to this next week. At the end of the poem, some of the basis is based upon the Ra'am, that there are two parts to the phenomenon of lightning. There's the barak, the lightning bolt, and there's the Ra'am, the noise. The noise is what scares us, but the noise is not dangerous. It's the lightning bolt. And let me give you a piece of advice. Once you hear the thunder, you're safe. The bolt's gone. So, I mean, in other words, if the bolt's going to get you, you're not going to hear it because you're gone before the thunder reaches you. Because the lightning travels at the speed of light, and the sound travels at the speed of sound, and that's a lot slower. Okay. Remember, we used to tell our kids when you see a lightning, count. And then you can tell how far away it hit, because 5 seconds means a mile. 5 seconds is 1 mile. Okay. So his lightning, ha'iru brakav tevel. Tevel means all of the inhabited universe. Tevel is the word used for the part of our realm where humans are there. Okay, apology accepted. I hope you realize we're in Psalm 97. Psalm 97. Okay, if anyone else came in late. Okay, so Tevel, the habitable part of our universe is lit up by God's lightning bolts. It's like, in many of the countercultures of the ancient Middle East, there were, many gods, and one of usually the god in charge of lightning bolts was like big. In Eretz Yisrael, that was Baal. In Greece, that was Zeus. In Scandinavia, it was Thor. So lightning, control of lightning, was considered like a big thing because it can be so scary. So his lightning bolts light up the land, the inhabitable land. Ra'ata b'tachel haaretz. It is seen by the world, and it causes trembling. In other words, yes, verses 1 and 2 were true. There is divine supervision that we believe is going on behind the scenes, and that gives us joy. However, there are events, there are occurrences that happen that, like a bolt out of the sky, come out and bother and overturn the apple cart and cause tremendous fear and trembling and consternation. And that's what he's describing here. And not only that, not only do people and the world tremble at the power of God, verse 5, I apologize. Harim kedona gnamasu. Mountains can melt like wax. Now there's a couple of occurrences where mountains can appear to melt like wax. One, of course, is an earthquake. Another could be volcanic. I remember the explosion of Mount St. Helens in the Pacific Northwest and how scarily awesome that was. But of course, it also has to do with lava flows from a volcano, or even an avalanche from glaciers and ice flows coming down. So this idea that mountains can seem to flow it again feeds into the previous verse and the trembling and the fear. And all of this happens before Hashem, milifnei Adon kol haaretz, before the master of the universe. So in other words, we're building first a joy, now a trepidation. What do we do with this trepidation, with this fear? Which brings us to the critical verse 7. Look, the poem begins very universalistic. Even though we use Yud Kei Vav Kei rather than Elokim at the beginning of the poem, and we'll talk about why when we get to the end, and Bezrat Hashem, that'll probably be next week. We'll get far into the poem, but we're not going to quite finish it. But now we're getting into the theological, is that the right term? I mean, we've been talking theology till now, but theology till now was the theology of nature. That God is in the numbers and in the physics and in the chemistry and in the meteorology. And okay, so I guess that's theology, but now it's more philosophic theology. And we've talked about how HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates everything, gives stability, gives the world a sense of tzedek and mishpat, that things work. But then sometimes there's a trepidation, a fear, an unsettling feeling from when things are like shaken up. And that brings us to Zion. Yevoshu kol ovdei Pesach. That the ultimate goal of the shakeup in the world is to bring embarrassment or shame. I like for busha, I like embarrassment. For klima or chlima, I like to say shame. But anyways, whatever, my translation in front of me says shame. I would have said embarrassment, but okay. embarrassment should come to all those who worship images, idols, and pray to false gods. Now, what happened here? We don't know exactly what the poet is referring to, and there are a number of opinions. Amos Chacham, in his commentary in Mosad Rav Kook, says that this is referring to those specific times in Jewish history when God did things specifically to undo the seeming authority of idolatry. The most famous example that David HaMelech would have known about was in Sefer Shmuel, when the Jews lost the Aron, and they put the Holy Ark to the Philistines, and they took the Ark and they put it in the same hall or sanctuary, whatever the right word is, ulam, of their major deity, Dagon. Dagon was today the word Dagon for us means grain. But he was their major god of the Philistines, but he was more of a sea god and provider god. And what happened was the statue kept collapsing, and with the Aron in the room. So that there are some ideas, and Amos Chacham says this, that David HaMelech would have specifically known about how God does things to specifically embarrass those that worship those items which are, meaningless. They're, stone and wood. And this is not the major point of the poem, as we're going to see as we go forward, but behind the scenes is an extremely important idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects everybody. We're still in a very universal mode here in the poem. That's going to change in a moment, but we're still in a very universal mode in the poem. Everybody should basically have this understanding of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They don't have to know Yud Kei Vav Kei, and they don't have to have Aseret Dibrot in the Torah, but they should have Shema Mitzvah B'nai Noach. They should have this understanding that there is a force, there is a power, there is a God behind everything that happens in the world, and that worshiping a lump of stone is just embarrassing. It's embarrassing to God that some of His creations do this, and it should be embarrassing to those briot, to those creations of God. And so let's do the whole verse. Zayin Yevoshu. There should be embarrassment. There should be a busha on all those who serve idols, who praise Mithalalim, praise Elilim, false gods. Ishtahavulo, bow down to them, call Elohim. All of those powers. I have to be careful how I translate this. Those gods don't exist. Here the word I believe means all of those powers that are attributed to those gods. In other words, there's a god of the sea, and there's a god of the clouds, and there's a god of the mountains, and there's a god of the rivers. And all of those aren't gods. They are natural phenomena. And what we're saying here at the end of this pasuk, all of those natural phenomena that people have foolishly deified, all of those indeed are subservient to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The idea of bowing to Hashem means subservient to Hashem. Yes, these forces do exist, but these forces exist as science or geology or whatever it might be, okay? And those forces are ultimately controlled by Hashem. Once we start this idea that the forces themselves bend their knee to God, we're starting to shift a bit from hashgacha klalit, general supervision. We're starting to shift to hashgacha pratit. Now, we're starting to move towards God's specific intervention and control. Once you say the forces of nature not just were set up by God and just, like the clockwork God of the deists, and things just run, Instead of saying that, when you say that these powers actually bend a knee and worship Hashem, that means that Hashem does periodically intervene. And it's this recognition that's going to lead us to the next pasuk in just a moment. I just want to mention that there's another interpretation. There's another approach to this verse that I just said. I said Elohim here, which is whole. It's a non-holy version of the word, which can sometimes mean judges and this power. I said it means the forces of nature, which I think is pshat. But other proportions say Elohim here means the celestial powers, like angels and other beings that are in the heavenly sphere. I'm very happy to say within the context that we're more talking about the forces of nature. Now, the translation in front of me says, "Bow down to him, all you gods," as if Ke'ilu we're addressing those false gods. I'm not sure. I think it's more the forces of nature, which mistakenly the idolaters have attributed to specific deities with a small d. But either way you look at it, they're both fine. What we're saying is that we should never be deifying the forces of nature. We should be always attributing them to Hashem. And that when people who have made that mistake are embarrassed by it and therefore begin the process of tshuva, to ethical monotheism and understanding that there is one God behind all phenomena, that brings a visceral reaction from us. And that reaction comes in verse Chet. Shama v'tismach Tzion. Zion heard about this. And was very happy that Zion, the Jewish state or the Jewish city, what the poet David HaMelech, I'm going to assume, meant by this idea of Zion is always unclear. It may mean Yerushalayim, it may mean the place of the Mikdash, it may mean an old fortress in the city. Whenever you say Zion, we're never sure exactly what it means, but sometimes it means the entirety of the country, but that was a later historical development. Zion being used to mean all of Eretz Yisrael was from the period of the Jews that returned from Babel. Here it means somewhere in the Yerushalayim area. So Jerusalem, I'm going to say, and was joyous that people were giving up on their idolatry. Whether this refers back to the Egyptians giving up on their gods or the Philistines giving up on theirs or some other event in Jewish history where idolaters saw the light, V'tagelna banot Yehuda, and the daughters of Judea were happy. Now, I'm going to come back to that phrase in a second. Lema'an mishpatecha Hashem, because they see the mishpat, the justice of God. When an idolater gives up on the idolatry and recognizes Hashem, that brings joy to those of us who have been loyal to Hashem, because we see that there is justice. We wait long time sometimes for justice, but eventually we believe that we see it, or in our case, we'll see it. Now, what do we mean by daughters here? There is a poetic usage in Hebrew that quite often, when you mention a city and then say the word daughters in the same phrase, that by the daughters you mean suburbs. You mean ancillary communities to the major cities. So assuming that Zion means Yerushalayim, Banot Yehuda means the cities of Judea, the towns, the communities of Judea, and that's probably what it means here in our context. It could mean, theoretically, that the women, but pshat is not that. What comes about was an expression that's used by Chazal and became a very common expression during the Middle Ages, that a city with many Jews was called Aim Ve'ir, a mother and city of Israel. And there were cities in Eastern Europe that got that name because they had Vilna, Aim Ve'ir, because it had so many Jews. The Jewish community there was numerous and strong. So that quite often a city is referred to as a mother, and that the suburbs are quite often referred to as the offspring daughters. It's a usage that became popular. Exactly how and why it started, I'm not sure, but it is a phenomenon. And the joy that's being expressed here in Pasuk Chet is the joy of the beginning, the rumblings of teshuvah amongst the former idolaters, that they have come to the realization that worshiping these inanimate objects is just embarrassing. And when you come to that realization, it causes, a sense of joy amongst us, that kind of recognition gives us a good feeling. Gives us a good feeling. Now, we are running out of time. I'm going to try to get in one more pasuk, which is going to leave the really powerful ending of the poem. But since we're going to be doing Bezrat Hashem 98 next, we'll begin with 97 next week, and we'll see if there's any time to get into 98. And the joy of Jerusalem and its suburbs it continues in verse Tet, Ki Atah Hashem Elyon, because you, God, are supreme, rise above, are just on high, way above the entirety of the land. Ma'od na'aleta, I'll call Elohim. Very much exalted, very much higher than all other powers. That the joy comes from this recognition that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is above our world, but also above the powers of nature. Now we could look at this as, God's above planet Earth or our solar system, but he's also above the galaxy and the cosmos and all of that. We could look at it that way, but the way it's generally approached is that God is above, supreme within our world, but that's equally true in Olam Haba. And therefore, this lends me to think that the word Elohim in our context, which started back 2 verses, that in our context, it means those other powers, angels and other divine beings in heaven. And so that what we're seeing is that God reigns supreme down here and is in total control, ultimately, of what happens on a day-to-day basis, making sure that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and periodically, intervening in the sense of a nes nigla, which we're going to talk more about next week. But not only is that true, but if we were able to experience and to notice the divine spheres where there are other very impressive beings, divine beings up there, singing Kadosh, 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 and things of that nature, but a Kadosh Baruch Hu clearly is superior to them too. So this verse starts off in the context of our world, but then expresses the belief that the supremacy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is absolute everywhere and at all times. And that idea is very, very powerful, and that's what lends a specific joy to Sion. Now, why specifically Sion? And I guess we'll end with this idea this week. Sion, for us, represents the interface with the other realms. That we believe that if prayers throughout the world gather in Yerushalayim, and then from Yerushalayim, go up to heaven. And this is based upon a very simple idea, basically, that the word Yerushalayim, which is written almost exclusively out of the 660 odd times it's in Tanakh, there's only 4 exceptions to what I'm going to say now. It's always written chasir. It's written as if you pronounce it Yerushalayim. There's no yud before the mem at the end, but it's pronounced as if there's a yud there, Yerushalayim. So in Pshat, in the Ketiv, the way it's written, it seems to be referring to a single spot named Jerusalem. However, in the Kri, in the way it's written, in the Masorah, we say Yerushalayim, which means there's 2 of them. Just like Yodayim, right? Raglayim, 2. Ayim means 2. Pamayim, twice. The reason for that is that there's a Jerusalem Shalmata and a Yerushalayim Shalmala. There's an earthly one, about a kilometer that way, okay? And there's a divine one that is in constant touch with it, right above it. That's the interface. That when you go to Olam Haba, whether it's Tefillot or Neshama, that you leave from Yerushalayim, and when you get to the other side, the first place you arrive on the other side is also Yerushalayim, another mirror image Yerushalayim. So that's why the joy over the embarrassment of idolaters and the joy of the understanding that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is supreme both here and in other realms is centered on Sion, because Sion is the place where it happens, where the connection can be made. And so that's what's going on in these verses. So the joy of Yerushalayim, Sion, and Benotecha, and her suburbs, her villages, her towns around her, is based on that double idea. The previous idea of people giving up on idolatry and turning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and now understanding that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, again, is in charge both down here and on the other side, whatever the other side is like. No speculation on that. So that's where we've gotten to in the poem. But what's happening here is we've been moving away from God, Elohim, even though the term Elohim isn't used, it's used Kevake, but Elohim at the beginning of the poem as the God controlling the forces of nature and hidden by nature, by the mist and the fog of nature, hides, puts a curtain between us and Hashem. And now we're moving more towards, but we have a realization of the power and the presence of Hashem. And that idea that we're recognizing and in touch with, which once you're starting to talk about this joy of contact and understanding the nature of Hashem, we're starting to it's less natural and more theological. It's less physics and more religion. That brings us to the last three psukim of the poem, which are indeed about religion and about Judaism and about righteousness. And those beautiful, famous last three psukim, sadly, we're going to leave for next week. But we'll focus on those and then move into the next psalm in the series, Psalm 98 of Kabbalat Shabbat. Again, everyone should be well, and I'm sure you all join me in doing as much as we can to honor the memory of Steinsaltz, and especially learning things that he has written is probably the greatest memorial to this giant that we lost Erev Shabbat. Thank you so much for being with me.